morning, everybody, and welcome to Oliver's webinar today, Shared Experiences from Healthcare Packaging Engineers. My name is Haley Schraben. I'm a group product manager for Oliver Healthcare Packaging, and I will be your host today. We've got just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So this webinar is designed to be interactive. At the bottom of your screen, you have the opportunity to click either chat or QA. If you're experiencing any technical problems, you can use the chat function and we will do our best to assist you. You can use the Q&A function to ask questions that we will answer at the end of the presentation. And if you prefer, you can check a box to make sure that your question is asked anonymously. And lastly, today's session will be recorded, so we will share that with all registrants. And now on to the presentation. Today's webinar is a panel of healthcare packaging professionals who have graciously agreed to share their career experiences with you all today. We're going to be discussing best practices that they use in their various roles, how they navigate and influence cross-functionally in their organizations, and we'll also be touching on some industry challenges and trends that are impacting packaging professionals in the healthcare space specifically. Let's kick things off with a poll question first to get an idea of the career experience we have in the audience today. So you should see a poll question pop up on your screen. How long have you been in a healthcare packaging engineering role? We'll give everybody a few seconds to clock their answers in. All right, looks like we're hovering around 50%, being between 0 and 5 years, and it's sort of split evenly between the rest. So that's fantastic. I think no matter where you are in your career, there's going to be a lot of great information for you to hear from this group today. All right. So with that, let's meet our panelists. So first we have Sydney Wilson. She is a consultant packaging engineer with Network Partners. She has a degree in packaging science from Clemson and has been in the medical device packaging industry for 4 years. We've then got Matt State. He's a packaging engineering manager with Olympus. He has a degree in packaging engineering from UW-Stout and a master's in technology management from the University of St. Thomas. He has 25 years of experience in this industry between Lake Region, Boston Scientific, 3M, and now at Olympus. And last but not least, we've got Kat Olson. She's a senior engineer in global packaging for Teleflex with a degree in packaging sciences from the University of Florida. Kat has 12 years of experience between RTI, Microair, and now at Teleflex. So a lot of variety in the group today, and I'm excited for you all to hear from them. All right, is everybody ready? Panelists good? All right, so I'm going to kick things off with a question for all three of you to answer. We know that packaging can have a significant impact to development timelines and user experience. We are all well aware of that, but it's not always top of mind, as we all are also well aware, for our cross-functional partners. So how do you ensure that packaging is seen as a value add upstream in the development process and is included early enough in conversations that that value can be fully seen? And kind of related to that, what are some strategies or tactics that you use to effectively influence cross-functionally? So Kat, I'm going to kick it off with you.
Okay, was hoping you were going to let me start. So what I'm hearing is that it's kind of like a two-part question there.
Yeah.
To start with like the value add side of it, I think one of the important things is if we can highlight that packaging is part of the product and it isn't just trash. It is part, like the opening and the aseptic presentation is part of the clinical workflow. So if we can understand that workflow, we can find a way to make it easier for the users. We can find a way to get an advantage over our competitors. And if we can do that, we can start to find that value proposition for packaging to have that time in that development phase that we brought on earlier. There are things that packaging can do that can be helpful to the clinician or to the nurses. Things that come to mind off the top of my head are something like, if you know that you've got a part of the procedure where, the user is trying to find a place where they can rehydrate or mix fluids, we can build in something like that into our, an inner tray, a holding tray or something where we can even make it so that it's, protected when they are mixing it, so we can reduce, potential for biohazard contamination or anything like that. So that's a way that from a design side, we can add that value but of course we need to be able to communicate that. So from a tactic standpoint, my number one tactic is always understand who you're communicating to. If you understand the type of information that they respond well to, the type of information that that can persuade them, then you can tailor your message to meet that need. So something like a project manager. Project manager, if you know, they're going to want the timeline and they're going to want the costs. Regulatory and QA, they're going to want to know what compliance docs you're following. Management, they're typically going to want to know timeline and costs as well. So if you can really tailor that information and how you can meet those, then you can be more effective in the way that you can persuade them and get that influence in that room to show that packaging has value.
Love that. Thank you, Kat. Yeah, knowing your audience, absolutely key. Matt, can you build on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about, what value we bring, I think we got to think about too. I think the way I kind of look at this is we really need to have this built into the organizations that we work in, right? It needs to be built into our quality systems. And unfortunately, sometimes we're fighting upstream where it's not. So I think a lot of the work that we need to try to do is to try to force a seat at the table, to try to show the acumen, the subject matter expertise we have, to build those relationships with the other functions and understand how our interaction with those functions, like Kat was saying, is, how you speak to them, right? R&D is going to want to look at something different than maybe the production floor is going to want to see. But I think that's kind of where it becomes key is, from my role in a company like Olympus, where our quality system might not be as far along as a larger, MDM, we have the ability to kind of build some of that into our quality system and really work with the functions. And even as we build like workflows and different work streams, we can drive how packaging is fitting into those and how we, are included further and further upstream so that we're not kind of brought in the 11th hour and then we're trying to put a design in, because at the end of the day, like Kat said, the product is the device and the package, and we need to keep pushing that.
Okay, great. Have you had some success building that into some of your processes?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I love about Olympus is that, we're new enough that we're really trying to build everything we can into policies, and we can actually shape and form our policies. I think that's one of the value propositions I sell to, new hires is we're, a large enough company, but also small enough that we have I think we've actually gained the clout to make those changes and to actually have, functional buy-in from other, groups. So when we propose something of how we want to do something with design verification or how we want to get into a swim lane for development, we get heard because of the relationships and the work that we've done to date.
Great, thanks. And Cindy, you've got kind of a unique perspective here coming in from the consultant seat. So I'd love to hear what your experience is and how you tackle this.
Mm-hmm. So I do echo what Kat and Matt have said about getting involved with the cross-functional partners early. However, usually if you're a consultant or a contractor, or even if you're just brand new into your career and maybe don't have the pull of a senior manager or a senior engineer, it can be hard to create kind of a culture shift in a QMS system to make sure that you're involved if it's not already been in place. And a lot of times with consulting firms, they come in when there are already issues existing. So one of those issues could be the packaging is not getting involved as early and it's affecting projects. And so I think if you don't necessarily have the pull to create that kind of shift in a company and it's not already there, being proactive and reaching out to the cross-functional partners at a granular level can really help as well, to really understand exactly what pieces of the project they are responsible for and how it ties back to packaging. And I know sometimes you might seem like you're bugging them, but really it's nice that whenever you're doing a packaging project or when you're doing a project that's led by R&D and you know that packaging needs to be included, you can kind of like assert yourself into the beginning of the process, even if it's not necessarily written into the QMS system. Being proactive really helps from that point of view as well.
Okay, love that. Great. Okay, let's move on to our next question. What are some aspects of your role or some skills that maybe you use now that weren't relevant when you started in healthcare packaging? Or a different way to maybe pose the question, if that's not something you connect with, would be, what's a skill that you think is imperative for packaging engineers in this industry that are early in their career that they might not anticipate that they need? And Sydney, let's kick it back over to you.
So I know I'm pretty early in my career, so I think that everything that was relevant 3 or 4 years ago for me is still relevant. But as far as what I didn't know would be super important when I first started, and I think it's imperative, is I've definitely noticed project management skills are very helpful in this industry. I know that a lot of packaging-led projects don't always get a PMO resource across multiple different companies and industries. And I think that having the skills to set a budget, set a timeline, set a schedule, gather your different inputs and activities, I think that it really helps to jumpstart your packaging projects. And then also just understanding cross-functional roles, as I mentioned earlier, since you do need input from them for all aspects of packaging. I know that sometimes people think that we just do the packaging, but it also ties into, the quality, the regulatory aspect of it, marketing, and we need all that input. So understanding that is a soft skill set that I think is really important. And then as far as technical skills, I do think that project management is really important.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for working on those project management skills? Have you taken any courses?
So as I've gone for the first 3 years, I've now become eligible for the PMP, so the project manager certification. That's the most popular one. And I've started learning the coursework for it, and I think that it is really helpful for it
Okay.
to set out the process of managing a project in a very concrete way. And so I'm working towards that. It's a very intense certification. So I'm not done yet, but I started that a couple months ago. I think it's been really helpful to kind of list it all out in a very clear and concise way.
Okay, that's good feedback. So even just taking the courses,
Even the course alone
taking
has
it out
been
the way, the
very helpful.
certification. Okay,
Definitely.
thank you. Thanks. Kat, how about you?
So from when I started, what's something that I think is new that wasn't needed before or wasn't highlighted before, for me, from 12 years ago to now, the usability side of things and the human factor side of things, that's new for us. I mean, obviously we always wanted to design something that could be used by the nurses or the surgical techs or whoever was the one opening it, even like the average person for those types of devices. But at the end of the day, it was, if it's sterile, that was most important, and it would be figured out. So now with the new 11607 ad back in 2019, that is much more in the forefront than it was 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I've seen change in terms of skills, and that maybe we didn't think we would need as much. And the other one, I'm going to echo exactly what Sydney says, project management. You go in, you kind of think you might be an individual contributor on a project because, okay, well, they're going to have a project manager, but a lot of times packaging is kind of its own little world. They kind of do the nose goes on who's going to run a packaging project. They don't, they think it's something quick, so that's, the packaging engineer will run it. So being able to herd the feral cats in the companies to try to get your project going, make sure everyone's performing the tasks that they need, because a lot of times packaging touches almost all aspects of a product and a company. So that's a big one. For me, that's probably the biggest one I didn't think I would need.
Okay. And have you kind of tapped into any resources to gain those skills, or has it been kind of learning as you go?
Yeah. So I think one of the ones that I did for the usability side was I did the AAMI
Okay.
design controls and usability trainings. I think those were great. They have a lot of, if there's any topic, I think always going in and looking to see what coursework is offered from major places. Never underestimate LinkedIn Learning. There's a lot of stuff there as well. And then honestly, even just webinars like this, free webinars that companies offer, because there's always going to be nuggets of information in there that are good. So
yeah, thanks for shouting out the webinars.
No problem.
Okay. Matt, how about you?
Well, I want to say that, yeah, the project management is a huge one. I'm not going to touch on it. They did a good job on that, but I think for the people that are in that 1 to 5 year range, that's obviously a skill that if you can develop, you're going to be more successful at your job. And I think it ties into something that just think about as a whole is I think as packaging engineers, we have a unique opportunity to really see all aspects of like an MPD, and I think R&D gets kind of siloed, and quality and regulatory gets siloed. But I think we kind of tie into everything. We see artwork. We have to fit the device into our package. So I think in doing all that and having to manage all that project work, I think we actually get a really good, vast experience that I think is just great because I think it can also help you move into different roles down the road in the future if you want to. My biggest thing though that I think I learned that I really had to struggle with, and I feel like I'm pretty confident in it now, is statistics. And I think I've had a few interviews with some interns recently, and a few of them I told, take statistics seriously. And if there's multiple courses at your university, don't just take the intro, take statistics 2, statistics 3, take as much as you can. Because the one thing I've learned when I first heard it, I didn't understand what it meant was y equals f of x. And that is that every output is a function of its inputs. And my staff likes to laugh at me because I use all these weird analogies, but it's like a simple analogy is, how in shape you are is a function of your age, a function of how much you work out, a function of how you eat. When you look at packaging, I think it's like at the core of what we do, we need to understand all of the inputs that we use for design, development of materials, design features, process settings, and really how do they impact the outputs to ensure the customer gets a sterile device that they can aseptically transfer into the field. So I think the more that you can kind of think in that y equals f of x and really understanding how every different input we deal with impacts the key outputs that we work with, I think just makes your mindset work and more successful in this role.
Love that analogy. Okay. Well, Matt, I'm going to throw it right back to you with this next question. What are some things that you think are essential for effectively managing a team of healthcare packaging professionals?
Well, so I just fell into this. I think you kind of you start your career and you think, oh, I'm just going to work, and one day somebody's going to tell me, hey, we're going to promote you to a manager. And a lot of us, I think we need to kind of own our careers more and really talk to our management. But again, it comes back to having management that's willing to have those conversations and support you. But I think I just kind of fell into this when I came to Olympus. It was something that was talked about. I had no idea how this would work out for me, but I don't follow the traditional textbook line of management. My staff would tell you probably a little unorthodox, but I think I do it more from, I've got something here from one of those insights learnings, and I do a lot more by involve me and show me you care. Those are my top 2. And why I think that's important is because I think what I've done with my team is, I understand my team as people inside of work, outside of work. I understand the work-life balance they're looking for. I understand their skills. I understand, their weaknesses. There's that whole competence model, be a conscious competent and a conscious incompetent. One thing I learned in my master's degree is don't focus on the things you don't know and obsess over it. The things that you're good at, do them and be good at them, and just understand the weaknesses you have and try to work at them, and at least know your limitations. But I think really creating an environment that's kind of judgment free, it's open. I have an open door. Everyone knows they can walk in, and talk to me. And I support my team, whether they make mistakes or do things that are great. And I let them know that they've done that they're doing well. I praise them because I remember the few times, that I would get praised by a manager I had in back in the day, how it made me feel. And I know I was doing better work. I should have been praised more, but I know what it felt like. And I told myself I would never do that to a team if I had that opportunity. I'd let them know at every chance I had, that I appreciated the work they were doing and that I respected the work they were doing. But I also, support them and let them know it's okay to make mistakes. You're an adult. Go do your thing. Don't micromanage. Give them the autonomy and the freedom to follow their passions and do what they want to do. Again, the whole analogy, give them enough rope, to do their thing, but not enough rope to hang themselves. But yeah, that's kind of the way I think, a good team is led. At least it's worked for me. And I think one other thing is we have a really, good collaborative group. We kind of step up and we help each other when we need to. And there's just a great camaraderie among the group. And one thing that I think has led to that is when I'm hiring, I actually will vet candidates that I think that have the skills, but then I let my team actually make the final choice. Because at the end of the day, if I have a candidate pool of 5 candidates and I think they're all capable of doing the job, but I want my team to pick the one that they think is going to work best with them. And to this point, it's worked out fabulously. And I think that's why we have such a close-knit group. And then I guess one last thing I want to say too is I just want to touch on, and I don't want to take too much time, but I want to say, we can't ever forget as managers that, and I think even as engineers, that we are employed because we're in a business that needs to make money. We are not here to be regulatory compliance specialists, right? So we have to make sure that we're thinking of the business first and foremost and ensuring our decisions are balanced between, business regulatory requirements and ultimately patient safety. You got to always keep that in mind. But I think the best engineers work in the gray area between policies and standards to make sure that they meet that requirement while still keeping the business viable. So that's
Yeah.
just one thing I think I've really had to try to coach into myself, even in this role, is we're not here to just because we set a spec at one point in time doesn't mean we can't change it if it makes more sense for the business. But then it's our job to do the work to prove why it can be changed, right? So
Yeah, love that. That really kind of ties back to that first question about showing value too, and getting yourself more involved upstream. Yeah. Kat, how about you?
So I definitely have a more limited experience than like small running and managing smaller groups. But I think for me, I think also about some of the best managers that I've had and what I've liked about those managers. And for me, what it is, I mean, Matt nailed it, right? Like Matt sounds like has like the best group there, and I would want to, yeah. So one of those things is I think for me is being approachable for your the people that are reporting to you, creating that, like you said, creating that open environment, being approachable and being available for them so that when they have issues, they trust you to go to you. And they know that, even if they make a mistake, you've kind of got their back and you're going to help go to battle for them and things like that. Creating that environment so that if they do make a mistake, it's okay, because that's how you learn that they're not going to get reprimanded for it or something like that. So being available for them, being approachable, because ultimately, part of it is also making sure that they're getting the training that they need, that they're growing as engineers as well and developing them. So if they have issues, you remove the roadblock for them. If they need the training, you also know what they need and you can help get them that training so that it creates an environment that they want to stick around and that they want to be in. So that's kind of what's been my favorite things about him, about managers that I've had. And then, the things that I think when I have managed someone has been something that I've really tried to focus on is just being approachable and being someone that they can trust to talk through their issues with.
Yeah, I love that trust piece. That speaks volumes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so next question. What do you all think is the biggest challenge or trend in our industry at the moment that's impacting your roles over the next few years? And then if you have any suggestions on how you think we can advance our field to address some of that, would love to hear that as well. So Kat, we'll just kick it right back over to you.
Okay. The biggest trend that we hear talked about, I think for me is, I kind of hear two of them, but the biggest one right now is sustainability. We hear it talked about a lot. But it's kind of tough. So I know that that's, one of these things that, people talk about at conferences and stuff, but without, the upstream and the downstream being really robust when we're talking about the design or the recyclability of it, it's hard to really make something more sustainable. We can make something smaller if we want or reduce material where we can. But even that becomes kind of tough because if you make it too small, well, the nurse can't open it. So you might have a tiny little product and then it has a big package and it kind of looks weird, but it's for a reason. It's back to that aseptic opening. It has to be able to do that. So, it was really tough with sustainability. And really, unless we start to create the infrastructure for recycling to be able to recover more of that material. The hospitals need to have the infrastructure in the hospital too to be able to recycle it. We're not going to get any on the downstream side of it, and on the upstream side, until regulations really start to push it and allow for certain things, it's going to be tough to really get more maybe previously recycled content or something into our designs, because it is more costly typically. And there's always that supply constraint fear of are we not going to be able to get this? And then are we going to have to essentially requalify a new material, because that requalification takes a long time. So I think that's a tough one. It's definitely a push. And I know that there are folks working on it every day, but in the immediate, it's a tough trend right now. And then the other kind of trend that I've seen a lot right now is, low dose EO. And that's one that is affecting us all the time, because we're trying to use less and less of that ethylene oxide gas. And we're just constantly having to not revalidate, but kind of look at our designs. How do we find ways to make it easier for the EO to penetrate the device so that it becomes sterile?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sydney, let's kick it over to you for this one now.
So I definitely agree with Kat. The first thing that kind of came to my mind was sustainability as a challenge. And I think that everything she said is super valid, and I agree with all of it. And I think that in the next few years, I don't necessarily think I see too much changing, because a lot of the times with our industry, it's single-use plastics because we can't reuse and we can't use recycled content in primary packaging. So I think it would take compliance changes to actually make a big effect on how we do packaging from a sustainability standpoint, since in this industry, we operate to patient risk and safety, compliance, and then the business risks. And if sustainability is not included in any of those, I don't think it will necessarily make a huge impact, but I can definitely see it becoming very critical in 25, 50, 100 years. So maybe towards the end of my career, or like my children's generation career, it'll become really critical. But I think for right now, it's more so we can do what we can to use thinner materials, use less materials, but the big changes will happen when it's regulated at a wide scale. And then I also really see supply chain being talked about a lot, especially since COVID. I entered the industry in COVID. I started in 2020. And so from the start, all the supply chain issues, supplier continuity issues were magnified when I started. And so to me, it became very important, even if it's probably always been a challenge, right, throughout our industry, but it became really important in COVID. And I think that those long-term effects will continue to affect how we operate and how we validate different suppliers, and making sure that we have backups now, making sure that we have different contingency plans in place, because now we know that something catastrophic could happen that you can really never plan for. And so having those contingency plans in place, I think, is more prevalent now than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay. And have you started to see that shift a little bit in the clients that you support, like putting some regular plans in place to mitigate that in the future? So it's like part of their regular development now?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Okay, Matt, how about you?
I feel like they kind of stole all the thunder. Just to touch on what they said, I think when it comes to supply chain continuity, I think that is obviously something that's a problem. And I think I don't know how it's going to really change in the med device industry, because not many companies have the appetite for validating multiple lids with multiple seal coatings and multiple trays from materials from multiple suppliers. So I think, you can do some creative engineering if you go from a PETG at one supplier to another and kind of make an argument that it's PETG, and kind of talk to things on more like a, molecular level, and how the, seal interface happens, and, kind of get into technical studies and stuff that might support that, but all that requires work, right? So I think that's a big one, especially when if you think about the supply chain itself, when you think about medical device packaging, there isn't a ton of options out there. There's you've got PETG trays, and now we're getting some, medical PET trays, MedPet, and things like that. we have, some reinforced papers and, different grades of Tyvek with, hot melt or water-based adhesives on them. We have different film structures, but there's not like we're not, nobody's come out with like an invisible package. Or that's stupid, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, we're kind of working within the same constraints. So I think, at some point, maybe that'll change, and we'll start to see more of that. But at this point in time, we are kind of limited, right? And I think one thing, you talked about how do we fix this? I'll just jump ahead and then jump back for a second. But when you think about how we fix this, kind of what that like Kilmer Innovations in Packaging, the Wicked Stability is doing is they're at least trying to give us an out where the long pole in the tent is stability, right? I mean, it's easy to go through and change from go through performance testing. It might be a 2 to 3 month window, maybe a little more depending on how quick you can execute. But realistically, it's the stability that really gets you. And if we have a way to utilize data and work together as an industry, right, as a whole, and say we are using these limited materials, right? They've been proven time and time again. I say that to people, they're tried and true, right? Why do we continue to test and test and test? So we can get to a point where this Wicked Stability really comes to fruition and we can shorten that. I think that's a huge step forward. When it comes to sustainability, I think the big thing for me is until we start to see more governmental true requirements that either give a kickback or some sort of benefit to MDMs or penalize MDMs for not having that material, we're asked to come up and use a material with probably less capability from a properties perspective, and it's going to cost more. How is that ever going to work for anybody? We're always looking at COGS and things of that nature. So I think that's another real challenge. And then the last thing I'll say is when it comes to all this sustainability, I just got one yesterday, and they wanted it done by the end of the month, a new tender for another potential client where some country wants a bunch of information on percent recycled content and things like that. And we don't, unfortunately, have it built in where we have a system where we can just go through, put in the SKUs, run, into a queue, run a search and actually pull it all out where we can submit it. It's much more manual. So I feel like there's this ever moving, you've got California that comes out with what feels like a different type of law, all the time. And all of a sudden, everything that you have as a US SKU or maybe a global SKU, as these change, you have to go back and kind of assess. And it's kind of like the state of the art for EU MDR. Now it's like everything has to be state of the art. As these things continue to change, I think it's a challenge. And I don't know how we get around it, but it's definitely stuff that you don't anticipate that you have to pick up. It's not planned. It's not resource allocation planned activities. It's kind of the ankle biter stuff that I think that really kind of drags you down and keeps you from working on future kind of long-term view things that can really save your company time and money down the road.
Yeah, that's interesting. You can kind of only do so much from your seat in the fast changing environment that we're working in. So those industry working groups are like a big support to move things forward. Okay. This is for all three of you again. What is something you've learned in your role that you now use as a best practice? And Sydney, I'd like to start with you on this one.
So I know I might sound like a broken record with this, but I think taking initiative to get people's deliverables and to get their cross-functional alignment is definitely a best practice that I've learned. It's not really something that you learn in school on how to acquire information from others. A lot of times in school, when you're doing practice projects, all the information is either fake information or you kind of make it up on the spot, or the professor gives it to you. So you don't have to do the information finding aspect of it. But when you're in a job, you do have to go find all of the inputs from quality, regulatory, R&D, marketing. And I think learning that soft skill as a best practice early on really jumpstarts your ability to get projects done efficiently. And then also I think that general organization skills and project trackers is a best practice that I've learned very quickly as well. I think that a lot of times we're all juggling multiple projects, multiple kinds of projects. And I think something that my first boss taught me is project tracking. And she was always super organized with it. And she would have it all listed out and would go over it. And it was something that not every manager I know can have the bandwidth to do. But since she had it and I was able to learn it, it's helped me a lot to keep track of everything that goes on in my role. And so I think that that's now a best practice for myself, as well as project management skills as well. Just being able to build out schedules and timelines and be able to visually present them, especially as a consultant, since I present them to clients. And so having the information in a bite-sized, digestible way so that we can quickly communicate where the project is at and what we need, what we've accomplished. That's also a best practice that I've learned. So it's a lot of soft skills, but I think they're super important when you're in an engineering type role that touches so many different cross-functional teams, and you have to collaborate with your own team as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can't really emphasize enough the value of being able to present something in a digestible format to cross-functional teams to really be effective. Yeah, love that. Okay, Kat, how about you?
So I'm also going to be a broken record in that I'm going to say getting involved early is definitely a best skill, and but I have a reason for it. So one of the things is it's like it can really save you a lot of headache later on down the road if you're involved early, beyond just, you know, the pace of like, oh my gosh, I have to get all this work done in such a short period of time because they didn't give me the timeline because I wasn't involved, or I wasn't involved early. They kept me out and now they didn't know how much time I needed. But even just when you are going to that verification and that validation stage, if you're involved early, you can really help to drive the wording of your design inputs and the design outputs so that you don't have this like nebulous or this random mishmash of like, you know, target words or whatever that you can kind of use when you're using your verification, but you can really have well-written design inputs so that it makes your verification easier and you're not trying to scramble to figure out how do you actually verify that random thing that someone wrote thinking they knew what packaging meant or knew what packaging was. So if you can get involved early, you can help drive a timeline and you can help drive what kind of testing you need to do and how you're going to support that testing. And then obviously, like, if you're involved, I mean, you've got to be pushy. Like, that's just, you know, packaging has got to be pushy. We got to pester people, all the P words. You just got to keep doing it because we need to get involved at that time. But then also it really helps if we can also get our customers' feedback, because a lot of times, you know, it's difficult to get in front of users. So when the person who's going out to get the user feedback, they're going out, a lot of times they're going out there to talk about the product, but we have a place in that clinical workflow. So we need to know our customers and our customers' feedback. So getting involved early, reaching out to those, creating that relationship with those cross-functional members so that you can have that comfort to be able to say, hey, when you go out there, can you ask this question for me? Can you ask the nurse that's there? Can you see if the surgeon can bring in the nurse? Can you observe this when they're doing that? You know, you can really get the customer's feedback, and that's going to help us with our design later on, because if you ask someone who doesn't typically open the packaging if there's any issues with it, they don't know. They're gonna be like, no, they don't complain. It's fine. And then that's not really helpful to us. And then the last little bit of kind of advice that I've used and learned as like a best practice is when you are writing your reports and you're doing that technical writing, I've always learned, make it look neat, make it look clean. Because if something looks sloppy, there's a good chance that someone's going to dig into it harder because it looks like it was like haphazardly thrown together. So make it look clean and nice and organized. And I think it'll go a lot easier too. So those are some tips.
Love that. Have you had some success in like working with your teams early on to get some VOC on packaging at your organization?
Yeah. I mean, I've been at Teleflex only for a short period of time, but definitely there and other places. I'm pushy, I'm loud. Yeah. So I will ask people if I can weasel into that early discussion on their, you know, risk files and their trace matrices and stuff like that. And normally people don't want to do someone else's work. So if you're like, hey, I opt to write the design inputs for packaging, they're like, sure, go ahead. On you, happy to have it. Just give it to me by this time, and they will write, and they'll just add in what we write. So there's definitely, if you're comfortable doing it, and I hope that you become comfortable doing it, there will be success, because people don't want to do anyone else's work.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, Matt, how about you? And then we'll probably kick it over to Q&A.
Yep. Real quick, Kat, I got dinged on a review about 15 years ago for being too diligent in making sure my stuff was overly neat.
Oh,
I actually got dinged on a review.
interesting.
It's a funny story. But I agree with you. I think the neater you are, if you can't do the small things, people can't trust you to do the big things. Forget about that. So I'm gonna say these real quick. I know we're running short on time. So
No, you're okay.
I think
We're good.
one quick thing to just say is just something to keep in mind is data is always greater than anecdotal experience, which is always greater than feelings. Nobody cares about your feelings. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, when you're trying to make a business decision or feelings don't matter, data matters. So come to the table with experience, understanding of your policies, understanding of your test methods, your materials, your standards that you follow, and bring data behind that. And you really can be, you're at that point kind of unstoppable. I'll give you 3 other examples that are like more like tangible examples. One thing we've seen is a lot of our design FMEAs, even process FMEAs have shifted risk between low and high. Like we get a new idea, we're going to change how we do risk management, and we're going to get queued, and we're going to go through a bunch of additional analysis, and we're going to drive this down to a low instead of a medium risk or something. So what we've been doing for things within our design verifications, if it's attribute data, let's say bubble leak, if it's an N equals 28, A equals 0 for like a low confidence, what we're but N equals 60, A equals 0 for a medium confidence, what we do is we look at that 95-90 confidence and reliability in our statement in our SOP, and we'll look at like an N equals 60, A equals 2. So at the end of the day, we're getting enough samples, expecting not to see any failures, enough samples to meet a medium requirement if it ever changes. But we're also giving us an out of having 2 failures, so we're not putting the project at risk, or the new development project. And we don't have to worry about risking any sort of slowing the launch. At the same time, it doesn't really apply to variable data because you can just reanalyze it, but it has kind of saved us in a few occasions. Another thing is just if in pre-DV, don't forget to do pre-DV if you have time. If you get, like they've been stressing, if you get up involved sooner rather than later and you have time, do pre-DV, do it at a higher assurance level than you plan on testing in DV. You might find false positives or false failures, but if you pass that, you're going to go into DV. You should never go into DV going, I hope I pass DV. That was something a manager once told me. You should go in knowing that you're going to pass. And the last thing I want to say is be mindful of like specs that you put, whether it's like a packaging performance spec in like a packaging requirements trace matrix, or even a tolerance on a print. For example, if a supplier sends me a drawing for a corrugated shipper, or even like a folding cart, and the tolerance is a 16th or an 1/8 or a 32nd, let's say, why do I want to transfer that tolerance onto my drawing if I don't need it to be that tight? I still need to get that component through the doors. And the last thing I want to do is paint myself in a corner where I'm shutting a line down because I put too tight of a tolerance on a corrugated shipper. I would look like a real idiot reporting that up to upper management as to that's why the line is down. So be mindful of that, and don't paint yourself in a corner. Don't go out, and we made the mistake of saying we really need to do a better job of the continuous homogeneous peel without fiber tear that affects aseptic presentation. And we put a spec in play without really, and assuming we were going to pass, and we saw some fiber tear, and we worked through it because all these standards are written ambiguously, and I think we proved that it wouldn't affect aseptic presentation, but we caused ourselves a huge problem. So don't paint yourself in a corner that you can't get out of, or a corner that takes a long time to get out of. Really be mindful of the specs that you're using, and make sure that they're real critical to quality specs, or specs that make sense for how the product or component is going to be used.
I love those. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, okay. Thank you, Kat, Sydney, and Matt. It's been a really, really great discussion. We're now going to move on to the Q&A portion. So for the audience, just a reminder, you can use the Q&A function in Zoom if you want to ask anything to our panelists. I will kick it off. Kat, this might be towards you, but I think any of you could potentially answer this. So, Kat, you kind of touched on this when we talked about industry challenges and trends. So the question is, can you elaborate on the challenges you're encountering with reducing the concentration of ethylene oxide entering the packaging? And additionally, I'm interested in exploring potential material modifications that could enable easier penetration of EO. Do you guys have any insights or suggestions that could facilitate this?
Yeah, so I think just the background is obviously like the regulatory bodies are trying to reduce the amount of EO that ETO sterilization is using. It's toxic, it's hazardous. So they really want to make sure that we're using as little as possible. In terms of how we can try to reduce that and some of the challenges, it's how do you increase the breathability, so that not only can the EO penetrate, but then it can also escape, so that you have less of those residuals sitting around, because the quicker that it can escape, you can also shorten your that holding phase inside the chamber, so you can speed up your sterilization process. So some things that I've learned is I was fortunate enough to go to the Kilmer conference a couple of years ago, and that was a topic there. And one of the things that they talked about was you can, if you can increase the temperature internally, then you're going to get essentially, I think, the molecules move quicker. Heat causes more energy. They move quicker. They can come in and out. So if you can make it so that your corrugate is actually less insulating, then you can get some of that temperature, because you're really not going to change the temperature of the chamber. It's just making it so that that kind of comes in and out easier. So there's that. You can also create increase the breathability of your corrugate as well, creating perforated corrugate so that it goes directly through it. There was, options where you have holes placed around the middle of the box, and they're like pre-cut, die-cut holes that can help EO kind of get in and out quicker. And then obviously the very simple one too is increase the porosity of your breathable layers. Can you go from can you do spot coating on your Tyvek? Can you use a different Tyvek gram weight or something so that you can increase the porosity, things like that? Can you move your labels so that it's not on the Tyvek side of the pouch? Obviously, you want that, you want to put it there because it's not blocking the sight to the product, but that does occlude some of that porosity. So those are some of the things that we've looked at in terms of being able to still get proper sterilization through EO while reducing the EO concentration. I hope that answered that question.
Can I add something real quick, Haley?
Yes, please.
This is a shameless plug for Oliver. You could also go with Oliver's hot melt coating, which is the little dots that obviously aren't completely flood coating like a water-based adhesive. You could go with zone coating, or you could just go with uncoated Tyvek with some sort of a film. That's not going to work for trays, but an uncoated Tyvek with the film layer that has like an easy peel or type layer built into it. The other thing you can do is you can always create a package if you need the breathability and need more surface area. It's going to cost a little more, but something that's larger that you bring back and create a secondary seal and then cut the extra header off or extra material off. So there's other options like that that you can do if you're trying to design something that has more porous, because at the end of the day, it's porosity of that surface area is probably the key. And then, like Kat said, other tertiary packaging that absorbs that moisture and that ethylene oxide that's carrying on that moisture during the sterilization cycle.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, there's a lot of good ones coming in. Matt, can you elaborate a little bit on your last example? You were talking about the fiber tear scenario that you had. So the question is, did the failures result in a change to your specification for aseptic presentation or delamination?
Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, we kind of just put this blanket, we kind of basically put the blanket spec like it's written in 11607, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at the way it's written, it says that can affect aseptic presentation. Well, we had some tears that, I think EN 868 and somewhere in there has like a little tiny schematic of like what fiber tear is acceptable. And I think it shows that if it goes beyond the seal, it isn't. But at the end of the day, when you're peeling substrates apart, one, we can't find anything anywhere, at least I haven't been able to. We were told maybe an AORN document had something, but one, I don't know whoever said the seals inside were not sterile. So even if that material was tearing apart and touching the device, I don't know why that's deemed non-sterile. I guess it's probably more of a perception thing. But yeah, so when we peeled, we had to go through we had to actually peel every pouch, take video, and then work with our clinical group to basically get approval that wouldn't affect aseptic presentation. So what we decided was, and we actually were just talking about this the other day, we are not going to evaluate that anymore as an actual spec in like a product or packaging requirements trace matrix. It's only going to be in our user requirements, and it's only going to be evaluated during design validation, because even if they see fiber tear, if they don't deem it as impacting aseptic presentation, why do we care? No, obviously we want to understand that up front in our development process. We wouldn't want to go to that point. This was something we were kind of stuck with a contract manufacturer. We were kind of behind the 8 ball. We had to pick up stuff from them because they weren't getting things done, and we were stuck with a design. But I don't think we would ever allow that design to move forward. We would, unless we, we're basically forced because of the size of this pouch and the way processing, there's always going to be double hits, coated or uncoated. We were just seeing that we were unable to kind of move away from it. So I think by moving it to a pure usability as as part of a design validation, I think you kind of eliminate any kind of, I guess, unsubstantiated numerical value that you might put on it in like a product requirement specification, and let the user make that decision. Because we did have other product that we know we saw in an HFE had fiber tear, and it was not deemed unacceptable for aseptic presentation, if that makes sense.
It does. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay, I think I probably have time for one more, depending on how many of you answer this one. So we'll see. And Sydney, I'd be interested to know your perspective on this, just because I know you've got some experience recently with different companies being in more of a consultant role. The question is, how do you define the right indicators to evaluate the sustainability of a primary packaging alternative? So how do you know that you're actually making a choice that is actually more sustainable? And have you seen anybody doing anything to maybe think about that more critically, as opposed to just, oh, taking some material out here, that's got to be more sustainable?
I think as far as indicators go, like we were saying, the actual materials themselves were pretty limited as far as the medical packaging industry goes. A lot of it is Tyvek, PET, PE, PETG. The validated materials are what we use. And I think that you can try to thin wall things, you can try to use less material, and I've definitely seen that happening. And then with the secondary packaging, the packaging that will not touch the device, you can definitely go for thin walling cases and dispensers and trying to use less material there as well. But as far as the primary packaging goes, since you can't use recycled content and the materials themselves, the material combinations, we don't change them very often. I think that it's kind of a struggle right now, and you can definitely attempt to use less material, but I think as far as the types of materials you use, we're pretty limited.
Yeah. So really just designing out as much as you can.
Right.
Yeah.
As far as
anything that you want to add? Have you seen anything done in your organizations or others where they're trying to define these indicators?
Can I just say, I think, so when the 5 years I was at 3M, I was actually, my little side job was the subject matter expert for sustainability for all of our packaging group. And I think, Sydney talked about reduce, remove. I mean, when you're lightweight, you're reducing, or you're maybe removing components, or maybe even trying to find a way for your components to be reused. Those are like the most kind of straightforward. You can't really question those. I think we got to be very careful when somebody's like, oh, we're using a PLA. Okay, well, have you done it? So maybe it comes from like corn or some more renewable resource, but have you done a life cycle analysis and looked at how much, CO2 emission there is, or how much water it uses? Because I think the tricky thing with sustainability is we only paint the picture that we want to paint and we turn a blind eye to how it impacts everything else. So I don't know who asked that question, or I mean, I know they talked about however it was phrased, but I think if you're going to do anything like that, you really need to find a good life cycle analysis tool and really make a true statement, because just going from a non-renewable polymer from, you know, oil to something from corn does not mean that it's just this great changeover, because if it uses more other resources to produce, you know, and what have you, right? Or it's, let's say it's heavier for some reason and it's takes more truckloads or whatever. I mean, there's other impacts out there that need to be assessed that we can't turn a blind eye to.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Anything that you want to add, Kat? It's okay if no, just want to give you.
No, I think they pretty much nailed it.
Okay, okay. Okay, well, we've just got 3 minutes left, so I doubt we have time to get through another answer. So I know to you, the audience, we had a lot of other questions come in. Let's see here. Okay, so thank you all for participating. If we didn't get to one of those questions, we are still going to share those with the panelists here. And we'll work to come up with responses that we can share after the webinar, as well as a recording of today. But before we leave, please, to stay up to date on the latest news, innovations, and trends in healthcare, be sure to check out Pack Talk, a medical packaging education platform by experts for experts. Thank you again to today's panelists. Appreciate you giving your time and your thoughts to our audience today. And to the audience, thank you again and have a great day.
Thanks, Haley.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.